I'm interested in time delays. This is what I do. Oh, okay, so yours is not like mine. I pushed down. Okay. How do I get to the next one? Oh, see, I was pushing it.
I think you can use
mine's
these for navigation.
Oh, well, they're trying. Okay. So project asked us to discuss symmetry, so I had to come up with a slide with regards to symmetries. And the interesting symmetries to me in the Navier-Stokes problems are those related to time. Because the Euler equations, when we have no viscosity, they are time invariant. Okay.
I don't know if this
I'll wait for him.
Okay, it's getting good. Thank you.
all right.
Okay. So with our fluid equations, in the limit that we have no viscosity, we observe various temporal symmetries. But the viscosity breaks these symmetries, and so for any real system, we don't have time reversibility. But we can recover some time symmetries in the limit that the Reynolds number goes, so I guess to 0, or it goes to infinity. Because, and this is the statistical regime that Kolmogorov and others have dealt with. So you can recover various symmetries by making some assumptions on the Reynolds number. So to me, this means that there's something about time in this system that's just very interesting about time and fluid flows. So what can I say? Okay, there. So there's the requisite discussion on symmetries. And the Navier-Stokes equations, they're inherently nonlinear. The Euler equations themselves are nonlinear too. And the Reynolds number itself is a ratio of time scales, which I think is beautiful. Oh, wow. Okay, puffs and slugs. So the laminar stuff when thing is flowing smoothly through pipe, not very interesting. And we can solve that exactly. Beautiful. The turbulent stuff we can deal with too, because when everything is isotropically and homogeneously turbulent, you got statistics, and Kolmogorov mastered that 100 years ago, 80 years ago. So that's not interesting. But what's interesting is the transition. It's when you're going from the laminar to all the nutty stuff, because that's hard. And what's neat about this is that you have this coexistence. So here's some pipe simulations, and this is being reproduced by gazillions of people who do computational fluid dynamics. You can have, things are smooth and flowing along, and then you have this puff, you have this localized turbulent structure, and then things go and be smooth again. And that's funny, that you have this coexistence, right? That you have laminar and you have this turbulent regime. But what happens is you increase the Reynolds number, these puff structures split. They split into two, and so you'll have one going this way and this one go this way. And then as you increase Reynolds number, the same thing happens. These things keep splitting, and then they eventually fill the pipe, and then before you know it, the whole pipe is turbulent. So it's neat. So in the goal to understand turbulence, what we want to do is try to understand these puffs and these slugs and how they grow and emerge to fill the pipe. Oh, what's further interesting is below a certain Reynolds number, these things just always decay. You have to have a finite amplitude disturbance or perturbation to even get these puff structures. But at some critical Reynolds number, like anything below it, the structures just always decay, but above it, you start getting puff.
That depends on how fast the fluid's flowing.
Effectively, yeah, because the Reynolds number scales with the mean velocity. So yes, it does. Okay, puff decay. Since I'm missing, I should have just brought my puffs and slugs. Oh, here's a different simulation. This one, I think it was in the Science or Nature Science. Oh, by the way, I get to meet all these people in like 3 weeks, so I'm excited. Same thing. In this case, they have their time going this way. So, time is like 500 down here. And then as time increases, you start seeing these puff structures split, and then they split, and they continue to split. And then as you increase, these things can continue to split. And before you know it, the whole pipe goes turbulent. So this is the goal, is to try to understand how this happens. Okay. So we have this transitional regime where we have this coexistence of this laminar stuff and these turbulent patches. And this suggests bistability, and I don't know if you're going to have it on the next slide because, oh, well, maybe. But when you think of bistability, because we've all taken plenty of statistical mechanics, we think of things like hysteresis, and then when you think of hysteresis, you think of time lags and time delays. And this is me trying to bring this back down to where I started, which is there's something interesting about time in the Navier-Stokes equations. And as far as I know, I'm the first person to really talk about the role of time delays in pipe flow. So that's what I want to do. That's the whole point of my project, the whole point of this, is to try to understand what role, if any, time delays play in the Navier-Stokes equations and then the onset of turbulence and pipe flow. Okay. Berkeley. Okay. So Berkeley writes all sorts of models for things, but he also has a model to describe the puff and slug structures that we see in pipes. And it's actually a two-component model. He has a continuous model. It's kind of Eulerian in a sense, right? You have your, it's kind of a reaction and diffusion equation. He has some other terms, some symmetry breaking. And he also has a discrete model. This continuous model gives you something, you start seeing mean shear, and you're able to model some of the qualitative features that you see on the with puffs and slugs, but you don't see any any puff decay or puff splitting, anything that's interesting that starts filling the pipe. So he has to introduce a second discrete model, which is effectively a tent map. So his model is two components. There's a continuous model, and then in order to get the rest of the features, he has to include a secondary discrete model. Okay, so I came up with my model. And in my model, the chaotic features you don't need to use a discrete model to describe those. It's just enough to have like time delays in the system to get the chaotic features you need to describe puff splitting and filling the pipe. Oh, and also I'd like to make some sort of connection to the Navier-Stokes equations, and that's kind of my goal with this project. Because Berkeley's model is very ad hoc. It does a great job of describing puffs and slugs, but it's ad hoc. He just says, okay, here are the parameters. They seem to do a good job, but he doesn't connect them with Euler equations or Navier-Stokes equations. Yeah. So let's see, non-dimensionalized Navier-Stokes. Oh no. We're missing. Yeah, well, like I said, I should have brought mine. I thought I had everything covered. Okay, you gotta imagine there's some Navier-Stokes equations here. There are, you can't see them. And I separate the populations into the laminar and the turbulent patches. And you have transition rates between the two. So you have a population. So as you saw with the Berkeley's model, you have this kind of chaotic nuttiness for a while that you have this homogeneous sort of turbulence, but it's localized. And this is very reminiscent of something called bursting that we see in neuron models. And Chris told me we also see it in cardiac models. You see some sort of weird, fast, kind of chaotic bursting behavior. It's not regular oscillations, but it is chaotic. So you see this, and then everything just kind of stops suddenly. So one example I provide where we see this in neurons is something called the Hindmarsh-Rose system. I just stole a picture of that so you can see that this is motivated by something. And what's interesting in these neuron models is that you have this parameter epsilon, which is a ratio of characteristic timescales. And again, so you see that you can start seeing this bursting behavior and this chaotic behavior just by incorporating time delays and timescales, which as far as I know, nobody's done with pipes yet. So this is somewhat inspiration for me, but this is kind of what I was basing my model on broadly. Okay. Oh yeah, so here you're supposed to see a little arrow that points to my little epsilons here. You see the ratio of characteristic timescale. Huh. What do you know? Okay. So you have the Navier-Stokes equations, and you have them separated into linear and nonlinear terms. So that linear terms have this 1 over Reynolds number. And that's our ratio of timescales. And you also have this nonlinear term, the term that makes the problem hard to solve, and it's not multiplied by Reynolds number. But I just effectively separate our one equation into 3 components, and so x, y, z. And then I include transitions, these transition rates F1 and F2 between the laminar and the puff states. And this is basic sort of model there. With the neuron model, these epsilons determine is a parameter that determines the fast dynamics and the slow dynamics. And so I'm able to solve for the slow dynamics with my model. And what you find is there's a fixed point that the laminar state and the chaotic state, the puff state, can coexist. And they coexist stably, and this meshes with the observations that we see that puffs have an indefinite lifetime at some critical Reynolds number. And so, yeah, so you get your fixed point, these things coexist indefinitely, and that matches observations. Success so far, Y model. What's next? That elucidates a lot. So we also have these fast dynamics. And this represents the, pardon?
Just ignore them.
It's always a good idea, isn't it? So with the fast dynamics, so as you go and you solve some math that's non-existent here, you do find an unstable fixed point. And what you start seeing are these crazy oscillations and this bursting, and of course it's unstable, but this is inherently chaotic, so it's chaotic in the sense that it's got sensitivity to initial conditions or any sorts of disturbances. And you do get these like spontaneous decays of these structures, so things are kind of puffy and homogeneous, things are just decay. So you see the chaos that you need. Oh, this is just based on time delays, so this chaos just emerges from the time delays. And it does everything the Barclay's model does, but without having to include the this separate discrete model. Just by including the time delays in the continuous system, you get the chaos you need to describe the bursting and the filling of pipes. Yeah. Okay, so my goals. Yeah, I'm confident I can do this, or I have done it. Chaos emerges from the continuous model just by the incorporation of time delays. I'm doing my best to connect it more closely to the Navier-Stokes equations. Missed those because they didn't show up here, but they're there. Oh, and NSF gave me money, so I have to thank them too. Woohoo. The question?
What's the connection between hysteresis and time delay?
Okay, so that's harder to see well, you get to see much of it here. So,
Please repeat the question.
what's the connections between hysteresis and time delay? So what happens with hysteretic systems is that you inject something, energy or something into the system, and it takes time for the system to respond to it, because there's no instantaneous action, right? I mean, it takes time to respond to it.
The energy has to diffuse in the system.
Yeah, and the system has to react to it, but it doesn't react instantaneously. It takes a little bit of time, and that time delay is the hysteresis. So you push on anything, you give it a moment, and then it starts doing whatever it does. And so, I mean, that's the connection there. You do actually see more hysteresis in one other version, because this model that I have is like 16 pages long, and I was trying to figure out a good 10 minutes to present to you. So this is the 10 minutes I chose. And so I think in the others you see the hysteresis a little better. When you see the equations, when I do my coordinate transformations, I moved everything to polar coordinates. So you have amplitudes, you have phases, phase angles, and you can see the rotation. So when it says that we have this coexistence, the stable fixed point, it's actually a relative phase between the laminar and the puff populations. And so that's when, because you can plot that and you can see them rotating together, kind of in phase.
So they cancel each other, right? Is it?
No.
The phase is zero? Or?
The relative phase is fixed, yeah. So like the time derivative of the relative phase is 0. But no, they're moving, in phase with each other, in lockstep. Phase synchronization.
So when you say there was a fast dynamics, you mean that there is like a hyperbolic direction?
Yes, and that's what the chaotic dynamics. So, fast dynamics. You said there's fast dynamics in the system.
Yeah, so it was in your slide. So
Yes, so I had.
see if it's the same as we mean in mathematics.
Well, I guess so. Fast dynamics. So I determined what was slow dynamics with this use of this Reynolds number being the parameter that controls the slow dynamics. So the fast dynamics is the other stuff that's oscillating relative to that. So when the other stuff is slow and the other, you just look at a different set of derivatives. You just see chaotic, crazy stuff. And what is, you don't get to see anything there. You can imagine something is modulated, so there's like an envelope. And that would be determined, that the slow dynamics determines the envelope, and then all that crazy stuff happening inside would be the fast dynamics. And so, yeah. I don't know if that's what you mean mathematically.
When you say it's a fixed point, what is not changing there?
The relative phases between the two populations. So when you switch to the complex, when you switch to the edge of the complex plane or sort of the rotational plane, and you fix the relative you fix their phases. That's it. The fixed point is that their phases synchronize, and so that's it. They just continue to live indefinitely. It's stable. You can take derivatives. You take like Lyapunov exponents or Jacobian, and you can find that it's a stable situation for the system.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we don't have time
Yeah.
for more questions. And our next speaker is Michaela. Thank you.
So how do I put this?
Put on your collar there.
Like this? Okay.